Vallabha Girivara Dari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvadikacharya Atto Tadasata Shri Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantarad Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Sambheda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to Samalahotis. All glories to Samalahotis. All glories to Samalahotis. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Okay, so 2:10:19. Vivakshor mukhato bhumno.
What's the verse?
2:10:19. I guess everybody's got their appropriate gadget up to proper location. Vivakshor mukhato bhumno. Vahnirvag vyahritam tayoho. Vahnirvag vyahritam tayoho. Jale chaitasya suchiram. Jale chaitasya suchiram. Nirodha samajayata. Here's another book. Somebody. Vishvakshor mukhato bhumno. Vahnirvag vyahritam tayoho. Jale chaitasya suchiram. Nirodha samajayata. Vivakshor mukhato bhumno. Vahnirvag vahritam tayoho. Jale chaitasya suchiram. Nirodha samajayata. Ladies. Vivakshor mukhato bhumno. Vahnirvag vyahritam tayoho. Jale chaitasya suchiram. Nirodha samajayata. Vivakshaho. When there was a need to speak. Mukhataha. From the mouth. Bhumnaha. Of the Supreme. Vanihi. Fire, or the controlling deity of fire. Vak. Vibration. Vyahritam. Speeches. Tayoho. By both. Jale, in the water. Cha, however. Etasya, of all these. Suchiram, a very, very long time. Nirodha, suspension. Samajayata, did continue. When, this is the translation, it reads, when the Supreme desired to speak, speeches were vibrated from the mouth. When the controlling deity fire was generated, then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying in the water, all these functions remained suspended. So I say, and you please repeat, when the Supreme desired to speak,
when the Supreme desired to speak,
speeches were vibrated from the mouth.
speeches were vibrated from the mouth.
Then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying in the water, all these functions remained suspended. All right, so the purport by Srila Prabhupada. The peculiarity of the gradual development of different senses is simultaneously supported by their controlling deities. It is to be understood, therefore, that the activities of the sense organs are controlled by the will of the Supreme. The senses are, so to speak, offering a license for the conditioned souls who are to use them properly under the control of the controlling deity deputed by the Supreme Lord. One who violates such controlling regulations has to be punished by degradation to a lower status of life. Consider, for example, the tongue and its controlling deity Varuna. The tongue is meant for eating, and men, animals, and birds each have their different tastes because of different licenses. The taste of the human beings and that of the swine are not on the same level. The controlling deity, however, awards or certifies a particular type of body when the particular living entity develops a taste in terms of different modes of nature. If the human being develops taste without discrimination, as does the swine, then the controlling deity is certainly certified for the next term to award him a body of a swine. The swine accepts any kind of foodstuff, including stool, and a human being who has developed such indiscriminate taste must be prepared for degraded life in the next life. Such a life is also God's grace, because the conditioned soul desired a body like that for perfectly tasting a particular type of foodstuff. If a man gets the body of a swine, it must be considered the grace of the Lord, because the Lord awards the faculty, or facility rather. After death, the next body is offered by superior control, not blindly. A human being, therefore, must be on his guard as to what sort of body he's going to have in the next life. An irresponsible life of indiscrimination is risky, and that is a declaration of all scriptures. Vidakshor mukhato bhumno vahnirvad yahartam tayoho jale chaitasya suchirang nirodha samajayata. When the Supreme desired to speak, speeches were vibrated from the mouth. Then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying on the water, all these functions remained suspended. in this section we've been discussing the gradual development, unfolding, evolution, whatever you want to call it, of the material creation. And in this case, we are learning that you have what we call the senses, and the senses make no sense or they have no purpose unless there are sense objects. So if there were sense objects but no senses, then there would be no purpose for the sense objects. So the sense objects require senses, the senses require sense objects. Both of those things have to exist as co-necessities. They have to be together. But besides that, we're learning that there's another level, and that is of the demigod in control of the senses. So we have each sense organ is manipulated or controlled by a particular demigod. Now we learn that the demigods and their controlling potency for that particular sense derive directly from the Supreme Lord. So now we've got four things that have to simultaneously exist. The Supreme Lord, from him come various demigods for controlling senses, and then we have the senses themselves, and then we have the sense objects, which is what the senses connect to. And in this section, we keep hearing this mysterious group of phrases, the adiatmic person, the adibodhic person, and the adidaivic person. And in Burijan's, at his lotus feet, Burijan explains that this mysterious terminology is quite simple, really, that the adiatmic person refers to the soul in this case. The adidaivic person refers to the subtle body, and the adibodhic person refers to the gross body. So these three layers are being discussed in this section, and how they relate. You know, we have the microcosm, the individual being, how the microcosm relates to the macrocosm, or how the little machine relates to the big machine. So the little machine is the human body and its individual components, but the macrocosm is the sum total of all material elements. And the subtle body is each individual has a subtle body, but there are demigods, and the demigods govern the direction the subtle body is ultimately taking. And then finally, we have the soul, and the individual soul is, of course, eternally a servant and co-playmate of the Supreme Lord. And that, of course, is not taking place in this material world, because we are allowing to remain dormant that aspect of ourselves. We don't allow that aspect to become manifest. Instead, we focus on the lower connection with the gross body and its senses and sense objects meeting. So all this evolves gradually. We have, the gross material elements, which are, all merged at one point in something called the pradhan, and then that turns into mahatat. Then the living entities are stirred into the mix like yeast into dough, and then that starts to bubble around. And then Brahma has to be there to organize the planetary systems. And we have to have the gradual development of these things, because the Supreme Lord sees, we see. Because the Supreme Lord has a body that has 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, etc. We have 2 arms, 2 legs, eyes, nose, etc. So the idea of anthropomorphism is backwards. Actually, it's not that the humans ascribe a human-like form to God. It's the other way around, that we have the form we have because God has that form. And so all these things are kind of a grid or a network or some kind of, mesh. You have senses, sense objects, demigods, and you have the Supreme Lord. And because the Supreme Lord desires to have experiences, he desires to have senses, because you can't have experiences without senses. And because he has senses, we have senses. And the demigods are in charge of various senses, as we've been saying, and now the living entity forgets his real nature in the spiritual world to serve the Supreme, and instead gets a chance to bubble around in this material world, doing various things. So I was thinking this morning, like, when we were all kids, at least I don't know what girls do, but probably similar thing. You had various toys, and when your friends came over, you would show them your toys, and maybe they had toys too. And when you would go to their house, you would play with their toys, and when you were at your house and they were visiting you, they would play with your toys. And, I'm just here to say that really nothing has changed, now that we're, much older. It's just that the toys are bigger, and that's about it, We're still playing with toys. But the object is to recognize the futility of all this and to attempt to reconnect the senses to their real sense objects. So when we're enjoying the material world as if it had no connection to the Supreme Lord, the senses are working on their lowest platform. They're connecting with the sense objects, and this affords tiny bits of happiness when a particular sense comes into contact with a particular sense object, especially if it's a favorable sense object, according to one's particular tableau of material preferences. As long as the sense objects we're coming in contact with jive with our particular tableau of sense objects, everything will be nice. Everything will be copacetic, we'll be happy. But we know the material world rarely aligns that way. And a lot of times we are meeting with sense objects that are either neutral or even averse to our sense of what we like. So therefore, we experience various kinds of boredom and miseries in the material world. So today is the appearance of Madhavendra Puri and also of Srinivasacharya. And, especially since we're pared down now to a 50-minute class cycle, this is, I think, cruel and unusual punishment that that Krishna is bestowing. There's no way we can talk about all those things and include a little bit about the verse itself. So I'm not going to talk about Madhavendra Puri, but I will say some things about Srinivasacharya. And I had a chance to kind of look over a nice rendition of the pastimes written by Satyaraj, that does sum it up. And very nicely. And when we hear about the activities of great devotees, we begin to kind of see what a life optimized for not working on the sense platform, but rather working on the platform of pleasing the Supreme Lord, what the differences are and what a person's life looks like when they're at that stage. So the narrative begins with Srinivasacharya's parents, who were Gangadhar Pandit and Lakshmi Priya. And they lived in a Bengal village known as Chakhandi. And living there, they had heard a lot about Lord Chaitanya, because Lord Chaitanya was big news in Bengal. And especially Gangadhar Pandit wanted to meet Lord Chaitanya. So he knew that at that time Lord Chaitanya was, nearby. So he decided to go see Lord Chaitanya. And on the way, he happened to pass through the Bengali city of Katwa. And wouldn't you know it, that the year was 1510, the year when Lord Chaitanya decided to take sannyas. And at the very moment that Gangadhar Pandit happened to pass through Katwa, instead of going to his original destination to meet Lord Chaitanya, he found out, to his surprise, Lord Chaitanya is right here in Katwa. And more surprising, the devotees were informing him, Lord Chaitanya is taking sannyas, and he's getting his haircut today. So this is the story of the haircut that launched 1,000 tears. So the devotees were devastated to learn that Lord Chaitanya was going from his pastimes as a householder, which they had always known him, and that he was taking sannyas. And Gangadhar Pandit thought, why is Lord Chaitanya taking sannyas? Sannyas is for people to clean up their act in the material world, that we're attached to the senses. So we need to go through austerities and, a kind of purification ritual of giving up a lot of material things. But why does the Supreme Lord have to do this? There's no reason Lord Chaitanya has to go through this. Of course, to get into reasons why Lord Chaitanya actually did take sannyas would be a whole class in itself, so we won't go there. We'll nail the, plywood over that part. But instead we'll continue, and so Lord Chaitanya took sannyas, and when Madhushil did the haircut, everybody began to weep, and all Gangadhar Pandit could do was just utter over and over again, Chaitanya, Chaitanya, Chaitanya. And when he went back to Chakhandi, he was still just saying Chaitanya, Chaitanya, Chaitanya. He was in a kind of a mental, emotional, very keyed up state. And he earned a nickname for himself, Chaitanya Das, because he was constantly just saying the name of Chaitanya over and over again. So he told his wife about what had happened, that he had gone to meet Lord Chaitanya, and on the way there he passed happenstance through Katwa, and he discovered that Lord Chaitanya was in Katwa, and he was getting his hair cut in Katwa. So he is now a sannyasi. And later, both Lakshmi Priya and Gangadhar Pandit, they went to see Lord Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri once Lord Chaitanya became established in Puri. Lord Chaitanya welcomed them and told them to immediately go see Lord Jagannath, which they did. They went to see Lord Jagannath. And while they were there, Lord Chaitanya, who is none different than Lord Jagannath, could understand that they had wanted to have a child and they couldn't have a child. But he knew that Lord Chaitanya would grant them the child. And that child would be a very exalted soul who would become known as Srinivasacharya. So when they came back from seeing Lord Jagannath, Lord Chaitanya informed them that soon they would have a child, because he knew what was in their heart, even though they didn't say anything to him. They went back to Chakhandi, and soon they had a child. So we know what day Srinivas was born according to the lunar calendar. We don't know what year it was. So there's a lot of debate as early as 1517, as late as 1585. That's a pretty big piece of territory there. But probably the earlier dates are closer and more likely, because the Srinivas was born shortly before Lord Chaitanya left the world, which was, of course, in 1534, or was it 36? 1534, 36, one of those two. Is it 34? Okay. So Srinivas then was given to education by Dhananjaya, Vidya Vachaspati. Boy, these names really get tricky sometimes. Dhananjaya Vidya Vachaspati, but really his instructor was Narahari Sarkar, who taught Srinivas as a young person and encouraged him to go see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which Srinivas Acharya decided to do. He wanted to go see Lord Chaitanya. However, just before he arrived in Puri, and this seems to be kind of a strange recurring motif in Srinivas's life, before he reached Puri, he came to understand Lord Chaitanya had already disappeared. So that must have been, circa 1534. And so Lord Chaitanya had already disappeared and left the world. And he learned also that Nityananda was no longer in the world. Maybe it was much later, because Nityananda passed away sometime later than Lord Chaitanya. But this was very depressing news for Srinivas. But here's another recurring theme in Srinivas's life, Shapna Chale. On the pretext of a dream, Chaitanya and Nityananda appeared to Srinivas, and they told him that don't worry, rather go to Puri anyway, and there you will meet Gadadhar Pandit, and Gadadhar Pandit will help you. So this is what Srinivas did. He continued on to Puri, and he went to see Gadadhar Pandit. And Gadadhar Pandit said, Chaitanya had told me that you would arrive, because Chaitanya is omniscient, so he knew that Srinivas was coming, and he knew the caliber of Srinivas's devotion, so he had prepared his associates to greet and to train Srinivas in Puri. And Gadadhar Pandit said, I am supposed to teach you the Srimad Bhagavatam, especially the intimate rasas of Radha and Krishna. So I have one problem, though, and that is that I have been reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, and whenever I read about Krishna leaving the gopis, I cry, and my tears have obliterated the letters of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam can't be read. So Srinivas was very happy to be connected now with Gadadhar Pandit. And he was thrilled that Lord Chaitanya had anticipated and created a system for him to learn. But they still had the problem of an unreadable Bhagavatam. So how is he going to be able to read the Bhagavatam when the letters are all squishy and watered out, you know? So Gadadhar Pandit said, please go to Bengal and contact the devotees there and get another copy. But please hurry, because my separation from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is so intense. I don't know how long I will be able to maintain my life. So Srinivas went to Bengal, and when he arrived in Bengal, he decided, I've never had a chance to visit the remaining devotees of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who knows how long they will be around? And I want to see, you know, this devotee and that devotee. And he did that. And this is one of those incomprehensible things. By the time that he was headed back to Puri, with the new, back then there was no, I think this is before Gutenberg and the printing press had been invented. Everybody had to simply get copies that were made by hand. So he was on his way back to Puri, and he learned that Gadadhar Pandit had left the world. So, you know, now he had the Bhagavatam, but he didn't have Gadadhar Pandit. Before he had Gadadhar Pandit, but he didn't have the Bhagavatam. So he's not sure what to do at this point. And this seems to be a recurring issue. So he's thinking, what do I do now? You know, I was supposed to be taught by Gadadhar Pandit. How will I continue my life? You know, what will I do now? And it turns out that he learns the news from Jahnavi Mata, who was Nityananda's consort, and she says that actually Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis have been instructed to train you, so please go to Vrindavan. So he hears this, and he thinks, all right, so my life has been saved. Now I will be trained by Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. And she says, but, you know, as with Gadadhar Pandit, most of Chaitanya's associates are devastated by the fact that he's no longer on the planet. And so I wouldn't tarry. I would go there as soon as possible. But Srinivas doesn't follow that advice. He visits various different places because now he's in the proximity, and he wants to see these various devotees. And for instance, he goes to Kanakul, and there is Abhiram Thakur. And Abhiram Thakur has this devotional whip. And it's said that this whip was called Jai Mangal. And if somebody hit you with the whip, if you got lashed with the Jai Mangal whip, you immediately developed ecstatic symptoms. Very interesting situation. So as I was saying, that you know, the fact that you could get hit by Jai Mangal was kind of cool. And of course you were there in kind of cool. So at any rate, he went to see other Vaishnava associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that were still living, And on his way to Vrindavan, when he finally got on the trail again, he learned that Rupa and Sanatana had already left the world. So now what? You know, and Shapna Chalai, on the pretext of a dream, he hears that actually keep on going, that you will be taught by Jiva Goswami and your guru will be Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So he learns these things. So kind of an interesting, strange sort of back and forth motion here. He's supposed to do something, he gets on the way to do it. Before he gets a chance to do it, someone leaves the world and he winds up meeting somebody else. So eventually, Srinivasacharya, he winds up in Vrindavan. And there, you know, he meets Jiva Goswami, who will now be his teacher. And Jiva Goswami says, it's a shame you couldn't have come a little earlier because Rupa and Sanatana were very eager to meet you, but now they're no longer with us. And he becomes the second disciple. There's also Narottam Das there, who becomes associated, with Srinivas, with Jiva Goswami. So these three become a very interesting group. They become three co-students of Jiva Goswami, Narottam Das, Srinivasacharya, and of course Dukhi Krishna Das, or who will become Shyamananda later on. But these three become the primary pupils of Jiva Goswami, and they're studying in Vrindavan. And this is at a time where the Vaishnav library and the Vaishnav Siddhanta are becoming solidified. You know, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is gone now, Nityananda is gone now, others are departing, Rupa and Sanatana are gone now, but their literatures are there, and Jiva Goswami and others are trying to consolidate what's there into a corpus of teachings that are cohesive and can be spread throughout the world. So, as Satyaraj puts it, that at that time, Vaishnavism was very popular in Bengal, but people had a very distorted vision of what it was. So this was, as many put it, the first traveling Sankirtan party. That here we have Srinivas, Narottam, and Shyamananda, who will be given charge of a Vaishnav library, and they will travel with this Vaishnav library and teach widely through Bengal. So there was a cart, some people helping them, and they began and they left Vrindavan to evangelize Bengal and make it into a Vaishnav center. And this is what they did. But little did they know that there was a kingdom that they were passing through called Vana Vishnupur. And in this kingdom, there was a king named Birambir. And Birambir was in charge of, secretly, a whole group of dacoits that that's how he funded his kingdom, that he had dacoits that were working for him. He was supposed to be the one that was controlling law and order, but actually he was the head, sort of dacoit. And how did he find out about where it was possible for the dacoits to attack? He had under his control. Also, some very qualified astrologers who could understand when there was some treasure in the proximity. And so the astrologers informed him that soon a small party would be passing through his kingdom, which had opulence beyond all imagination. Of course, this was the Srimad Bhagavatam and the other Vaishnava literatures. The king thought of this, of course, in entirely mundane terms. He thought, you know, wow, what kind of gold, what kind of riches, what kind of jewels must these be? And sure enough, his dacoits reconnoitered and saw that, yes, there was a group passing through. And so they waited for an appropriate time. And when the devotees were sleeping, they crept in and stole the cart with all the Vaishnava books. So you can imagine, I mean, now we have Vedic literature on our cell phones, on our computers. We have all kinds of versions of book versions of it, big ones, little ones, all in one book versions, all kinds of versions. But at one time, there were no physical versions. There was just this. And the really devastating part of it was, this was a one-off library, you know. This was it. This was all the books, you know, all together, so that they could use them as reference to preach widely. And, you know, ostensibly, I assume they would eventually make copies of them too. But the original thing was missing. It had been stolen in the middle of the night. And of course, you can imagine Birambir's surprise when he wondered, what kind of jewels do we have? Oh, we're already at the end, huh? So, Bink, I get the hook at this point. And this is as far as we're going to get on the story. But short ending is that Birambir becomes a devotee, and Srinivas gets the books back and becomes an illustrious devotee and starts a new form of kirtan. We're giving the Reader's Digest super fast-forwarded version now. And he gets married. Okay, so thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srinivas Acharya, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. And thank you very much. Hari Hari Bo. I was still thinking we had till 8, but we only have till 7:50, right?
Tell you they were going to do that?
Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Deva Ki Jai. mercy, granted forward, Lord Master. Oh, Master, merciful, give us the shade of your feet. Your prayers for all of the three worlds. We take shelter of your feet. To Baba King.
low power movement. Hare